Few fighters have captured the imagination of the boxing world quite like Roy Jones Jr. did in his prime. With his unmatched athleticism, lightning-fast reflexes, and an unconventional style that left opponents baffled and fans in awe, Roy was a true enigma in the ring.
10 seconds to go, round number 6. Jones says, come on, Vinny, let's call it a day. That's going to be it. I think Tony Ryan, it's over. No way.
He wasn't just fighting his opponents, he was redefining the sport with every punch, every move, and every victory. But the brilliance that Roy displayed in the ring was no accident. It was the result of a lifetime of training, a hard and unique upbringing, and a guidance of a one-of-a-kind coach and his father, encouraging creativity and innovation in the ring. In today's How Champions Train, I'm going to dive into how Roy's upbringing, training and coaching and mentality influenced his extraordinary style and made him one of the most dominant fighters of his era.
Real? You got to. Y'all must have forgot.
Y'all must have forgot.
Before we dive any deeper, let me introduce you to today's sponsor, Boxing Timer Pro, a new all-in-one training program created for coaches and experienced fighters. This comprehensive platform was designed to help teams train with structure and improve faster. Choose from dozens of training modules, build custom workouts, and drill new techniques systematically. Dominate the opposition with Boxing Timer Pro. You can use the code below for an exclusive discount with the app. But now, let's get right into the video. Roy Jones was born and raised in Pensacola, Florida, where his childhood was anything but ordinary. Growing up on a farm, Roy's early years were marked by relentless physical and mental challenges imposed by his father, a decorated Vietnam veteran and a former middleweight boxer himself. Roy Sr., or Big Roy as people called him, brought a military-style discipline to every aspect of his son's upbringing. From as young as 5, Roy was subjected to grueling training sessions that pushed him far beyond what most children could endure. His father's approach was not just strict, it was merciless, as he would give out verbal taunts and physical punishment with a stick that were completely routine in his childhood. Big Roy sought to toughen up his son by stripping away any semblance of weakness. He'd say, "What's wrong? Getting tired? Told you were too little. Told you weren't quick enough." Big Roy was simply trying to push Roy Jones Jr. to his limits and beyond. By the age of 6, Roy was not only handling guns, but also taking on demanding farm chores. From looking after the chickens, working on the fields, and even driving a tractor at the age of 7, he carried out tasks far beyond what was typical of a child of his age. And these duties, combined with his father's relentless training, created an environment where failure was not an option and fear was a constant companion.
Well, did you ever fear your father?
Yeah, I feared my father for a long time, up until I got about 16. And when I got 16, I started realizing that, I got to get away, because if I don't, something bad gonna happen.
This is kind of personal, but can you explain to us the reasons? I mean, your father was really tough on you, right?
Yeah, of course. And I gotten, it's like there have been days when they talk about abuse and all that. Now, I laugh at those things, and like when they got on Adrian Peterson about that, it's like, I was like, really? Are y'all serious? I mean, everybody can make a mistake here now. My father did that way worse than that, not making the mistake. He did it on purpose. My father was different with that. I have gotten beaten 3 times in one day. Some of it I could have been innocent, some of it I wasn't, but still, you got beaten sometimes 3 times in that same day. I have marks on my arms now that are from beatings that I got when I was a kid. You understand me? I got real beatings. So of course that's gonna make you afraid of a person. When you're a kid and a grown-up is beating you that bad, of course you're afraid. But once you get a certain age, you say, okay, now it's time to fight back.
Roy Sr. also owned a boxing gym, where he devoted time to training other young boxers in the area, helping them to stay out of trouble. However, his approach to training with his son was far more brutal, with no room for the leniency he showed to others. Even when he was a boy, Roy Sr. would spar with Roy Jr., taunting and challenging him with relentless intensity, forcing him to find ways to get better. But it didn't stop there. Roy Jr. would often set him up with the older, bigger boys, further forcing him to develop his skills and resilience under extreme conditions. This intense and often terrifying upbringing forged in Roy an extraordinary toughness but an unorthodox fighting style we've never seen. Interesting, in a Rolling Stone article, he vividly described how the environment made Roy a product of punishment, but it also laid the foundation for the fighter he would become. His father's harsh methods instilled a level of discipline and mentality that few could ever match. Whether it's right or wrong, it did set up the foundation for Roy's later dominance in the ring. And one unique aspect of Roy's development from these younger years was his fascination of cockfighting, which he observed regularly on the farm. And watching these brutal fights, Roy started to see parallels between the roosters and his own battles in the ring, and he admired how the birds would bob and weave and strike with precision, even seeing for himself how he could incorporate these movements into his own boxing style. And this unorthodox approach, combined with the lessons drilled into him by his father, gave Roy the edge that would prove invaluable in his career.
As a kid, I used to like cockfight. I like anything that fight. I used to catch insects and make them fight. So I learned about the roosters and learned that they naturally fight. I started watching. And what I really wanted to know was what made one rooster better than the other, because they're all just roosters, you think. So obviously if they one beating the other, something has to make them better. So I started also studying what made those better. And I learned about the fangs, the different things they do, to hold him, then attack him, feint him, make him punch, then attack him. So I would watch the roosters all the time, because roosters develop a pecking order. They develop a pecking order on their own anyway. They're going to do that anyway. So I would always watch them to figure out what made one the king of the pecking order, what made him better than the rest. And when I learned what that was, it was a few things I figured out. Once I would figure them out, I started emulating those things in my boxing style.
To me that the referee was on the verge of warning you for grabbing the ropes.
I wasn't grabbing ropes, I was chicken fighting. My Wayne was behind my back.
Chicken fighting.
I was a game rooster then. That's that chicken fighting stuff.
You did that to make him come at you, right?
I had to make him commit. He didn't want to commit, so I had to give him the chicken thing. I ain't looking for no ropes. That's a chicken Wayne. You know what I'm saying? Watch him. Come here. Don't do that. Ha! Come here now.
By the time he reached amateur level, Roy's unique style and relentless work ethic propelled him to victory after victory, culminating in the selection for the US Olympic team in 1988, something that he'd always dreamed of achieving. He even dominated the competition, reaching the final before getting one of the worst robberies we've seen in Olympic boxing. And despite not getting gold, he was still named Boxer of the Games. I'll be the first to admit, this brutal upbringing he endured is simply not an ideal way to raise a child, but for Roy, it was the crucible that forged him into one of the greatest fighters in boxing history. Without those harsh early years, it's hard to imagine if he would have developed the same level of skill, toughness and resilience that defined his legendary career. Now it's important to go over the training schedule before we cover all the individual elements. And this schedule I'm about to show you is a typical regimen of Roy Jones during his prime years. This would obviously change throughout his career as he got older and moved up in weight and even back down, but hopefully this will give you an idea of what he would do each day. So it would be an early start for Roy, as he'd usually get up between 5 and 6 AM and have a full body stretch before he would get ready for his run. Between 5:30 and 7 AM he would go on either a 3, 5 or 7 mile run, plus he would also do body leg weight exercises on top of this. Between 7:30 and 11:30 he'd have his breakfast and he'd rest or just sleep. Then from 12 to 3:30 he'd be in the boxing gym, working on all things boxing. Between 4 and 6 PM he would relax, fish or even play basketball. And then between 6 and 7 he'd have his dinner, and between 7 and 10:30 he would just relax with his family, even play video games. And at 10:30 he'd be in his bed. Now when you look at this typical day, like most champions you've seen me cover, it isn't an overcomplicated schedule. Plus, it was always helped that Roy was always dedicated and disciplined with his training, while he was always just a very active man, especially with his upbringing on the farm, constantly working and doing something. And this no doubt played a part in him showing commitment and always being ready. On a side note, I always find it interesting how a lot of former past champions come from that farming background and have exceptional power, and you definitely have to count Roy among them. Now as just discussed, Roy would go out on a morning run between 3, 5 and 7 miles, which would help build up that cardiovascular endurance while helping to improve his stamina and even help with his weight management. Roy's said to have done this between 5 and 6 days during a typical camp training week. Interestingly, I noticed he would run in boxing boots sometimes, and whether this was a common occurrence or whether it helped him stay on the balls of his feet, only he will know, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. From what I've looked online, I couldn't see anything about sprinting in his younger years, but he did work out in sprints when he was much older, which is still pretty impressive. Jumping rope was also part of Roy's workout, either as a warm-up or towards the end of his boxing training, and once again this would help to improve his overall cardiovascular endurance, conditioning, rhythm and coordination. Another thing he would do was play basketball, something Roy would do after his boxing training in the afternoons.
Oh my gosh!
And playing basketball would help Roy improve his endurance and develop things such as his coordination, which may have had little impact on his performance in the ring. Notably, Roy even played a game of basketball for his local team during the day before defending his IBF middleweight title on the same night. Something pretty extraordinary when you think about it.
Now basketball, it takes a little bit out of you, you know, but it's really mental. And it's just like jogging and a fighter getting themselves down in weight a couple of days before the fight. They put out a lot. And they work and they work and they work, and then they have to come in and fight.
Would you do this against a formidable opponent?
Yeah.
Would you play basketball before against a formidable opponent?
Yeah, just give me one.
What was the point you're trying to prove? Would you tell us by playing basketball and fighting?
Well,
what point is there?
Well, it's like De La Hoya has Chavez, he has my friend Ike Quartet, he has Trinidad, he has a lot of people out there for opposition. I don't have anybody that the public demands to see me fight or that you guys really want to pay me enough to take a chance and go out there and fight. So I started creating challenges for myself. Basketball to prove that I can go play basketball, come out here, watch Smoking Main fight, then come and fight, prove something to myself. That anything I set my mind to, I can do. That gave me the urge to get up for this fight. Normally I would have looked terrible against this guy because he's a durable guy. I would have ran out of things to do. My mind wouldn't have been sharp, and this would have been a horrible night for me.
Roy also pointed out that basketball helped him keep off weight. And once he stopped playing after his move up to heavyweight, he said he felt a big difference in trying to keep off the weight. He said, "I don't put on weight. As long as I'm playing basketball and stuff, it stays pretty much off. There was one period in my life when I went out of shape. I had quit playing basketball for a while, and I find it interesting that other champions such as Lomachenko, Usyk, and Tank Davis have also engaged in other sports alongside their training, taking a break from the routine while escaping the intense solitude that boxing can bring." Now let's look at the key areas of his boxing training. After his warm-up with strength and conditioning elements, which I'll get into soon, he would also make sure to do lots of stretching before even getting started, upper body and lower body. But the first thing he would go straight into was shadow boxing. Watching Roy shadow boxing is just like you would see when he fought. Lots of movement, feints, combinations and defensive movement. You can really tell when watching him that he's visualizing what's in front of him, while also experimenting with different moves and getting loose before he moves on to his next training station. This would be typically 4 4-minute rounds with a 30-second break in between. And it's actually refreshing to look at Roy shadowboxing, as you really get the feeling he's experimenting and using different movement while trying to perfect them at the same time, such as working on footwork or moving backward while punching. That is one of the things I love about shadowboxing. It's great at developing your technique, but it also gives you the opportunity to try out new moves and make it a sandbox exercise. I did notice there was also more rigid training where Roy's dad and another trainer would shout out commands in a group setting, such as using feints, footwork or combinations. What I find interesting though is there would be no full extension in some of these punches. Instead would just be short punches. It was more about being alert and reacting to what they would hear next.
Combo off angle. Double combo off angle. Then with that break your flow. Triple combo off angle. Double combo off angle. Hang back. Feint. Hand feint. Head feint. Right and left. Left, right, left, right. Right, left, right, left. Position count, flip right. Position count right. 3 times. Step 3 times.
While there's also just clips of more conditioning shadow boxing of continuously throwing punches. Next up, we have the classic heavy bag. There aren't too many clips of Roy using this, but there are videos of him using it as an interval circuit as he's punching it continuously in high intensity before using lighter punches or even with partners. While he would also use it in a more traditional sense of working on his combinations and power while making sure to use footwork and moving around the bag. Something very important as you don't want to build up bad habits unless you're trying to work on a specific technique, for example. and he would typically do this for 4 4-minute rounds as well, with a 30-second break in between. Next up, we have more reaction bags, one being the speed bag. Roy probably has to be one of the best I've seen using this, as he could do it lots of different ways using the front and back of his hand for example. This would obviously help with his hand-eye coordination while also working on his shoulder endurance as well. And he would do this for about 16 minutes straight with a 30-second break in between before his next training station. Here's Roy talking about why he liked using the speed bag.
Hand-eye coordination. You have to be able to do a lot of things with your hands, but your mind got to be able to register that before it happens. And you got to be able to see the speed bag in order to catch it. And you'll see when you see me beat it, the different things that I do with it to try to make my mind work and make my mind work faster. So that's great hand-eye coordination, but it also makes your minds try to make your hands obey. So that's a really fun thing to do, but in boxing, that's important because when the timing for that counterpunch comes up, you got to be able to make your hands and your head and your feet obey. So it's good that you have a speed bag to work on your eye-mind coordination and your hand-mind coordination. So that's what I like about the speed bag most. Let's see.
Another reaction tool that Roy often used was the double end bag. Interestingly, he used this as a partner drill, taking turns hitting the bag before reacting accordingly. It also makes it harder to predict the next movement of the bag, making it a bit more challenging to hit. And sometimes he would try to move around the bag, but you could tell that he was sharp and alert when using this, which is great to see. Next up was mitt work with his trainer, which was also a big part in the way Roy would work on the specific combinations and techniques, including those famous hooks. But what I really like about the mitt work Roy does is that he's always moving, treating his trainer as if it's an opponent in front of him, while they would build up to more complex combinations. At first working on the jab, before doubling it up, then going on to crosses and hooks, before bringing it all together. All while his trainer is continuously moving and making Roy think and react accordingly to what's coming next. I also like how Roy is working on the speed and the snap of the punch. And these clips are when he was at light heavyweight. I have to admit, he looks just as fast as welterweights or lightweights when throwing these shots and combinations. Finally, there was sparring, and this is where he could put everything into practice. There's actually quite a lot of sparring clips online, and all that technique and conditioning training really all come together here. As you can imagine, during his prime, he would often dominate. However, interestingly, Roy said he would learn from sparring guys who were much older or on the way out of the sport, so he could pick up tricks from them. On top of this, he also wouldn't do too many rounds with them, because he didn't want them to figure out how to challenge or beat them if they were to ever face in the ring.
So who you was sparring with?
Not nobody's like that. I was sparring guys that was on their way out, like the Buster Draytons of the world, who had experience but didn't make it, but had the experience to show me. Lindale Holmes, who was an IBF super middleweight champ, but was kind of limited. So people that had tricks but were on their way out.
So you learned from that?
Sparred Reggie Johnson 1 round. When I realized I could whoop him, he was ranked number 1. I was ranked number 8. I sparred with him 1 round. When I realized that I was better than him, I got out. I'm not going to teach you how to deal with this fight.
Yeah.
This is an interesting take from Roy, as I guess many top champions in the past have taken advantage of matchmaking by how well spars have gone. From what I've looked online, there are varying reports on how much he would spar, but I imagine it would change from day to day, while the intensity and occurrence would also change as it got closer to the fight. And it's clear from looking at clips online, he would work on defense entirely, while also looking to set up counters. Overall, Roy's boxing training was something else, and everything you would expect from a top-level champion. Here's a quick look at what a typical boxing training session would look like, excluding sparring. For Roy's strength and conditioning, he mentioned that he wouldn't do any weights until his move up to the heavyweight division. During his younger years, when he weighed between 160 to 175 pounds, he focused on bodyweight exercises, and these exercises included body squats after his runs. But before his boxing training and his warm-up routine, it consisted of things like torso twists, push-ups, pull-ups, and Roy emphasised working on his core as well, which is crucial for a boxer as it enhances things like punching power and enables more forceful blows through the kinetic chain. He also strengthened his torso to help withstand body shots by using medicine ball impact conditioning. An example of an ab circuit routine included 4 sets of 100 sit-ups, 4 sets of 100 leg raises, and 4 sets of 100 crunches, with 30-second breaks after each set. When Roy did move up to the heavyweight division for his fight against John Ruiz, his training incorporated more weight exercises such as Olympic power cleans, single dumbbell presses, and narrow grip lateral pull downs. He also added in resistant band exercises to his shadow boxing routine. Furthermore, Roy used medicine ball throws and slams, a ballistics exercise which we see many boxers use in their strength and conditioning today. Additionally, he also enlisted the help of a renowned sports performance specialist, Mackie Shilton, who assisted him both physically and mentally as he prepared for one of the biggest fights of his life.
This is my very first time working with Mackie Shilton. Mackie is a guy who's really an inspiring leader. He's a guy who you definitely would want on your side if you were going to war. Mackie helped Michael Spinks beat Larry Holmes. He helped Riddick Bowe beat Evander Holyfield once. And he's worked with a lot of football players, basketball players. He's worked with every type of athlete you can think of.
There you go.
He thinks like a fighter plane. He thinks like an F-15. He wants to be that jet that nobody sees. He thinks a lot like I think. And in having that, that's really the only thing I think that's missing, that was missing from me.
I think for this fight against John Ruiz in this training camp, the goal is to, first of all, help Roy to win, to be the world heavyweight champion. In order to do that, I think it's critical that we understand Ruiz. We understand what kind of man this is, who he is, and we understand what Roy will have to do to beat this man.
Once again, I think it just shows the mental side is very important, especially as Roy had to overcome the fact that he was facing a much bigger man. And if you didn't know already, Roy went on to win that fight. In terms of Roy's recovery, it would involve a lot of rest in between his sessions, and I'm sure most would not advise playing basketball after a 3-hour boxing session, especially if you have a fight coming up that very night. Nevertheless, during his downtime, he would make sure to rest by sleeping, or go fishing, or even play video games, just hang out with his family. While stretching before and after his training was a big part of him keeping himself injury-free before and after sessions. In terms of his diet, Roy says he would mainly have the following: turkey, chicken, pasta, and plenty of vegetables, stating, "I always eat nutritious food." There's no doubt that Roy was one of a kind, and I don't think he would have come close to the success he had without the hardened mentality instilled in him. His dad deserves a lot of credit for Roy, but Alton Merkson also played a big part in his success, and should not be forgotten for the work he put in behind the scenes with Roy, especially during the years when Roy and his dad were estranged due to a personal issue between them. But Roy Sr. laid the foundations and fundamentals in his son, which eventually allowed him to show something we have never seen before in such dominating fashion. Furthermore, it was the base he was given though at a young age that helped him become a fighter that was an unstoppable force, focusing on the perfect technique for his punches and movement instead of completely focusing on conditioning work. Roy actually talked about this and the issue it plays in modern boxing.
So now people are more trying to take care of their bodies and get themselves in better condition than they are worried about technique. So a lot of guys, even when I train right now, they come to my gym and I make them spend time, repetitious time like I did, on technique. They don't like it. They just want to beat bags, beat hand mitts, spar. Well, how can you do all this if you don't know the real technique that it takes to do it? So that's what's happening. We're missing all that because soon you come to the gym, first thing you want to do is hit something. In our day, it wasn't like that. You knew what kind of fighter you were. You knew how to jab. You knew how to throw a right hand. You knew how to throw every punch. You knew how to counter every punch. You knew how to defend every punch. You knew boxing from here, then here. Now you learn it from here.
And I think Roy actually makes a very good point that boxing technique is completely overlooked now. And although Roy had broken many of the rules as he progressed himself, those foundations are what made him successful, while very much giving him the element of surprise.
If they can predict you, then they know what you're going to throw. They can prepare for it. The best thing about fighting, the best thing about sports, the best thing about any competition is the element of surprise. If you can surprise a person, then you get them out because they're not ready for it. If you can't surprise them, then they're ready for it, you're not going to do much. But if you can surprise them, that's why teams blitz. They try to catch the team unready for it, then blitz them. If you shock them, the blitz going to work because you catch them not ready for it. Element of surprise.
Style. You'd hit them with the famous left hook, but then you'd catch them with the right.
They don't know what's coming out.
They don't know what's coming.
They think that's it. So I set them up for that, make them think that's it, but that's not it. That's just a prelude to make you think it's okay to relax now because you survived the hook. No, it's a right hand, it's an overhand right, it's an uppercut, it's another hook, it's a whole lot that comes after that. And that's the one thing I have a hard time teaching my fighters. You can't go in for the kill with what he's expecting. It's always the one that he's not expecting. The one he's not expecting usually comes shortly, either 1, 2, or 3 punches after the one that he expects. Then he'll relax.
Not to mention, I just think Jones was mentally on another level to most. From his run to 92 to 2003, it has to be one of the most impressive in boxing history. But it's the work behind the scenes people don't see. His training and dedication played a huge part in his success.
I'm not gonna lie, and then you know people ask you, they say, do you spar with Roy? I say no. I straight up tell them no. They say, why? I be like, are you crazy? You think I want to get into a match with this guy? Come on.
You play chess, but you already showed me your move. So the first time I do this, you know what I'm saying? You never get a right hand off. Okay, so I go 1, 2. Ain't nowhere in the hell gonna get there. It ain't nowhere in the hell. By the time you get there, I should be so damn fucked on to call somebody to find a way.
Roy Jones Jr. has to be one of the most impressive athletes we've ever seen in this sport. Not to mention his training, although incredibly intense, he lived and breathed the sport as a boxer should, with the main focus always being on boxing, while also looking to add innovation to his style and approach from the upbringing and coaching he received. But with Roy, we also saw he was willing to admit and adapt to things like strength and conditioning with his move up in weight. Furthermore, we see more and more boxers today adapt this into their own training schedule. Nevertheless, although Roy would go on to lose often after his second loss to Tarver, it's crazy to think how long he would box into his 40s and 50s, still competing against high-level contenders and champions. And it just goes to show that he's always been willing to live the life of a champion. And it's great to see Roy now as a trainer, giving incredible advice and wisdom of technique and even mentality to be the very best, giving a far more different and understanding approach compared to what his father did when he was growing up. And although I personally feel the abuse and strict upbringing was wrong, you do wonder if this is what spurred Roy on to be the success he was. But I feel that if he wasn't given that love and support he needed, he could have been just as successful in my opinion. I guess no matter what you think, Roy proved that you can do things differently if you put in the work, and have the mentality to do so. This has been Jamie from Boxing Life. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Roy Jones' training and life. Do you think anyone could have had such a dominating run as he did again? As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Gonna be right every time. I love to fight. Love it with a passion.